Hello, and welcome to the webinar for the Macy Foundation's Catalyst Award for Transformation in Graduate Medical Education. I am Dana Levinson, Chief Program Officer at the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation. The purpose of this webinar is to provide you with an opportunity to learn more about the 2025 Catalyst Award Grants Program, now in its third cycle. We will share with you the vision, highlights, and information about the program and the application and selection process. We would like to thank the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, who provided matching funds to help support this initiative. The agenda today is in two parts. The first is a 20-minute presentation, including a brief overview of the program from our president, Dr. Holly Humphrey, as well as remarks from Dr. Lynn Kirk, Chief Accreditation Officer of the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. The second part and the remainder of the time will be devoted to questions and answers. We welcome any questions that may come up as you hear from our speakers. At the end of the Q&A, we will spend our last minutes on some details you will need to know in order to submit your online application in Macy's Grant Management portal. This webinar is being recorded. You will be able to view the slides and listen to the presentation and Q&A on our website within the next week. For any questions you have during today's presentation, please use the Q&A function on your screen. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the prepared remarks. And now I would like to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Holly Humphrey, President of the Macy Foundation.
Thank you, Dana. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of you for joining us today to learn more about our third cycle of the Catalyst Awards for Transformation in Graduate Medical Education. As many of you already know, the Catalyst Awards support projects that improve the clinical learning environment and the experience and education of our residents and fellows. We created this initiative in response to the pressures and challenges that we currently see in graduate medical education across the country. I know that for many of you, these pressures and challenges are very well known. They include providing medical care in the context of an increasingly polarized society, a growing public distrust of science, medicine, and healthcare institutions themselves, which often require residents and faculty to possess the skills and tools to build therapeutic relationships with their patients and other members of the interprofessional care teams in which they work and between the profession and the public. There are longstanding and ongoing struggles to build positive learning environments that reduce physical and emotional stress. Instances of mistreatment and workplace shaming remain all too prevalent in graduate medical education. And finally, sometimes we continue to have a culture that encourages neglect of personal self-care as a professional ideal, including policies which can provide inadequate support for families, ongoing pressures to come to work when sick, and a balance between education and service, which all too often can favor service over education. Our goal with these awards is to provide support for innovative programs and strategies to equip learners with the tools, skills, and strategies to flourish in the clinical learning environment. The first two cycles of these awards have already demonstrated the potential of these awards to make positive changes within their learning environments, as well as to provide models that can be utilized by other programs and institutions. We have also learned some important lessons from our initial grantees, and that is that the period of support needs to be longer than 1 year. And given how tight budgets can be, the resources provided need to be more substantive. We are very grateful to the ACGME, who has generously chosen to provide matching support so that we can award a full cohort of projects at this higher level of funding support. Before I go on into the details of the program, I would like to introduce you to a representative from the ACGME who is likely well known to many of you, Dr. Lynn Kirk, the ACGME's first Chief Accreditation Officer, who is joining me on the webinar today. Prior to joining the ACGME in 2019, Dr. Kirk was a UT Southwestern faculty member for over 30 years. She served as Director of the Student Health Service, Associate Dean for Medical Education and Graduate Medical Education, and Associate Chief of the Division of General Internal Medicine. Her research has focused on medical professionalism, faculty development, clinical guidelines, geriatrics, and medical education. She is President Emeritus of the American College of Physicians and has received many accolades, including election to mastership in the American College of Physicians. As the ACGME's first Chief Accreditation Officer, Dr. Kirk leads the ACGME's Specialty and Subspecialty Review and Recognition Committee activities and monitors and manages the development and dissemination of national accreditation standards for residency programs, as well as oversight and continuous quality improvement of the accreditation process. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lynn Kirk. Lynn?
Yes, thank you, Holly. I appreciate that, and welcome to all of you who are interested in what we think is a very important project. The ACGME is pleased to partner with the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation on these Catalyst Awards for Transformation in Graduate Medical Education. These awards supporting projects that enhance the clinical learning environment to improve the experience of residents and fellows in the areas of promoting diversity, equity, and belonging, increasing opportunities to learn in and from high-performing interprofessional teams, and preparing future health professionals to navigate ethical dilemmas will contribute significantly to the knowledge and processes that many GME programs can use to enhance the outcomes of the education and training they provide. For the third cycle of the Catalyst Awards, the additional support from the ACGME will increase the total amount each awardee can apply to this important work over 18 months. It is important for learners to have the tools, skills, and approaches necessary to help them succeed in the clinical learning environment. We at the ACGME were impressed that the first two cycles of these projects have already demonstrated positive changes within specific learning environments, as well as the development of important models that can be used by other programs and institutions. The ACGME has recognized the critical role the clinical learning environment plays in shaping physicians during their GME experience. The ACGME's formative process of the Clinical Learning Environment Review CLEAR program has given institutions sponsoring GME programs significant information on their own clinical learning environments. We know from a large body of work that physicians carry forward the quality, safety, and cost effectiveness of the clinical learning environments in which they train throughout their careers as physicians. Dr. Tom Naska, the president and CEO of the ACGME, has noted that the Macy Catalyst Awards provide an exceptional opportunity to generate positive change, foster innovation, and improve the overall experience for residents and fellows. Supporting these projects furthers our shared vision with the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation to prepare physicians of the future and improve the health of the public. We so appreciate the broad interest by institutions and programs in this focus on the clinical learning environment and in the Catalyst Awards. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Dr. Kirk will be joining us for the question and answer part of this webinar. But before we get to that part of the webinar, I do want to point out a few of the highlights of the program, as well as review the eligibility criteria and so on. So let me start with the program highlights. as I've already referenced, we are increasing the awards for this third cycle of the program so that the recipients can receive up to a $100,000 award inclusive of indirect costs, which we are capping at 10%. And I also indicated earlier that this award will be expected to take place over an 18-month period. Now we are planning to select we're expecting that our review committee will help the selection committee identify 6 projects for this funding. And then finally, at the halfway point of the grant period of funding, we will invite a faculty member and a learner, so a resident or a fellow or a chief resident, to meet for an in-person convening so that we can share experiences, challenges, lessons learned, etc. And we are going to host that convening concurrent with the 2026 meeting of the ACGME in San Diego. The Macy Foundation and the ACGME will work together to provide complimentary registration for the meeting, along with airfare and coverage for a one-night hotel stay for the purpose of attending the convening. Now, let me say a word about the eligibility for this program. We are specifically interested in hearing from individuals who are directly involved in graduate medical education. So generally, this includes faculty, staff, residents, and fellows. And this is specifically an award that is focused on our colleagues in medicine. We are interested in projects that are specifically centered in the clinical learning environment, and that's really in contrast to classroom settings, which are obviously much less likely to be the case in graduate medical education, but I do want to emphasize the importance of the clinical learning environment. Now, successful projects will describe, implement, and assess innovative strategies that equip the learners with tools, skills, and strategies to flourish in their clinical learning environments in their graduate medical education programs. So the proposals should ideally align with at least one of our 3 priority areas. And those 3 priority areas are described in some detail on our website, but I'll just highlight here that they are promoting diversity, equity, and belonging in the clinical learning environment, increasing opportunities to learn in and from high-performing interprofessional teams, and preparing future health professionals to navigate ethical dilemmas. Now, while we are interested in projects that have a strong local value in their local institution, we also will be looking for projects that have the potential to at least serve as a model for other institutions in other types of institutions across the country. Programs selected for support must commit to sending representatives to the 2026 ACGME Medical Education Conference in San Diego, California, as I already mentioned, so that we can hear a progress report on your work. And that progress report will be given to the Macy Foundation and to representatives from the ACGME. As I've already mentioned, the Macy Foundation will be providing airfare for up to 2 representatives from each funded project. Generally, that will be a faculty member and a learner, as well as covering 1 night of a hotel stay for this meeting. And the ACGME has agreed to waive the conference registration fee for those grant recipients selected for this award. Let me say a word about the selection criteria, which our reviewers, our external reviewers, and ultimately our selection committee will be using. You see those criteria broadly present on the slide in front of you. But the grant applications are going to be evaluated on importance and originality, specifically the likelihood of having an impact and achieving the goals that are set out by the project that you write about. We are looking for strong evidence of commitment from your institution for the project. And one of the reasons that we're looking for that commitment from your institution is that we want to ideally see that these programs are sustainable over time after the period of support ends for that program. And as a demonstration of institutional support, we are expecting there to be letters of support from either the medical school, if the medical school is a sponsor or co-sponsor of the project, but many, in fact, most graduate medical education programs do not have a direct base in the medical school, and so that's definitely not a requirement, but letters of support from the clinical department or from the affiliated health system will absolutely be important to the application. And we're looking for matching support or in-kind support for these projects. And then finally, we're looking for co-creation where we can see very tangibly the voice of learners in the projects that get proposed for funding. So there should be strong evidence of co-creation with the residents or fellows themselves, together with faculty and or staff. And we like to see evidence of co-creation not only in the implementation of the project, but at the very beginning. So the design, implementation, and perhaps also in the assessment of the project itself. Additional information about these awards, along with descriptions of the projects that were supported in the first and second cycles in 2023 and 2024, are available on our website. And you can use the links that are found in the chat in today's webinar to read more about the projects that were funded in those first two cycles. I'd now like to say a word about the application itself and describe what will be a part of the application. I want you to know that we are very purposefully trying to keep the application as brief as possible to encourage even very busy clinical faculty, residents, and fellows to apply. So the project application will be asking you to describe the purpose of your project. Really, what are the goals of the project? And to do that, we are looking for the appropriate background and justification, as well as your description of the potential impact on your local clinical learning environment. We'd like you to describe the work that will be undertaken to achieve your program's goals and objectives, including the major activities, the stages of work, the methods that you will use to carry out the project, as well as a timeline of the activities that will be a part of the project. We'd like you to identify the impact or change that you're anticipating your project will achieve, indicating what measures and assessment plan you will use to make a determination if the impact has in fact been successfully achieved. Of course, we'd also like to make sure we understand your view of the barriers and limitations of the project and how you intend to address those barriers and limitations. We'd like you to describe your communication and dissemination plan for your work, including your target audience for sharing the results of your work. And we would finally like to ask you to describe your plans for sustaining your program or project after the period of the funding from the Macy Foundation and the ACGME comes to conclusion. You will be asked to provide some information about institutional readiness for change and readiness for support of your project, including a description of the events or experiences which led to this application and why this is the right time to take on this kind of a project at your institution. And to convey that information, we'd like to see a letter of support on institutional letterhead signed by the program director for the discipline that is the site where this project is going to be implemented. Sometimes the program director, him or herself, is the author of the project. And in that case, we'd like to see a letter of support from the department chair. And then, as I've already referenced, it is extremely helpful if we can see a letter of support from health system or hospital or, the community site where the project will be implemented. The letter should include a description of both the financial and non-financial support for the project at the program, department, and/or institutional level. The biosketch forms that we have as part of this application must be completed for the principal investigators, and we are expecting that while you and your team may have many more co-investigators involved in this project, we are looking to see the biosketches of 2 PIs for the project. In fact, our system will only allow you to submit 2 biosketches for 2 of the PIs, but you are certainly welcome to have up to 5 PIs. We're just not asking for all those biosketches. We will also be providing up to $100,000 of support over an 18-month period, which will begin on April 1st, 2025, concluding on September 30th, 2026. And as I mentioned earlier, these funds include indirect costs, which are capped at 10%. Okay, let me review some key dates for this process. Applications are due on September 20th, 2024 by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So we're trying to be respectful of the residency application process that we know many of our core residency program directors will be inundated with applications to your residency program. And so we are mindful of the other things that you have on your plate in establishing this due date of September 20th. Your project proposals will then undergo an internal review process with a standardized assessment that will be conducted by the Macy Foundation and ACGME staff. We will then engage outside experts who will provide specific guidance and insights into the different specialties that we receive applications from and the different disciplines within graduate medical education. All those receiving funding will be notified by February 1st of 2025 for that project period, which I already outlined as being from April 1st of 2025 through September 30th of 2026. Okay, with that background, I'd like to invite your questions, and I'd like to invite my colleague, Dr. Lynn Kirk, to rejoin me. And between the two of us, we are going to do our best to answer the questions that you have. So Dana, let me turn it back over to you.
You, Holly. We are getting many questions about matching and in-kind support. For matching or in-kind support, does this mean that the institution has to contribute the same amount of financial support?
Okay, well, let me take that question. The short answer is no. We know that would be a non-starter for many of you if you submit a project with an ask up to $100,000 that that's an impossible ask for you from your department or institution. However, some degree of financial support will certainly be looked upon very favorably by our review committees, but we're not expecting it to be at that same level. In fact, and instead, what we are looking for is evidence of in-kind contributions. And what I specifically mean by that is that you have identified a staff person who can support this program with a certain percentage of their time. Now, that, of course, should not be in addition to their other full-time work. So that would likely be either some part-time staff support or reallocation of other work, but in-kind support from staff definitely would be very appropriate to include. Examples of other in-kind support would include access to space that you may need to carry out the project, access to equipment, access to other expertise that you may have at your institution to help with assessment, to help with actually developing the project itself. So I would imagine that there would be some combination of in-kind support based on resources that you already have at your institution, but that may be specifically directed to focus on this project. And perhaps some additional financial support that you would be able to identify by working with the health system or with the department. But we absolutely are not expecting a dollar for dollar match up to $100,000. So I hope that clarifies. But Dana, if you have anything that you'd like to add or revise to what I said, please feel free to jump in.
Thank you, Holly. That was very complete. And please know that we will accept, if you have additional questions as you are putting together a budget, you may send those questions to our info@macyfoundation.org email address, which I will ask Tori to put into the chat. One other question regards co-creation, noting that learners are spread pretty thin with GME duties. How do you envision learner participation as investigators? How much is enough?
Great question. And Lynn, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this. And these are just a few ideas. They are by no means, solid expectations, but I personally really deeply resonate with how busy your residents are. And I understand completely the intent behind that question, how much is enough? Some of the things that I've seen our early awardees in cycles 1 and 2 use would be like focus groups, getting a group of residents together for lunch and getting their ideas in a brainstorming kind of process. Other things might include engaging a chief resident or a group of chief residents to not only brainstorm, but to maybe take this on as one of their projects for their chief residency year. So I think a combination of gathering feedback from larger groups of residents and maybe identifying 1 or 2 champions of the project. I often have found that even very busy residents, when they feel passionate about a project or an area of interest, they somehow can really catalyze the whole institution to be engaged themselves. So it's not as if there's a minimal threshold or a maximal threshold, but I hope that certainly my experience in residency education has been that the more that you can invite feedback and experience from the residents, whether that comes through focus groups or individual champions, the better the project is likely to turn out to be. So I'm personally looking for authenticity in resident engagement. But Lynn, you've spent your whole career working with residents. What ideas do you have?
Yeah, no, I certainly support everything that you said, Holly. And I guess the way I would look at it is making sure the residents or the learner, whether it's residents representing the group, et cetera, those involved with the project are at the table when the important decisions are made, so that the time that they devote are really where their input is needed to say, this is going to work, this may not work, this is how it might work. Just to remind you, we require scholarly activity of residents, and this is wonderful work that would qualify for that scholarly activity. So their participation will be a win-win in that they will be able to help shape their clinical learning environment with the time, even if it's limited, that they can devote to co-producing what happens in the project. But then they also get that research, which they're very excited to do.
Thank you, Holly and Lynn. Another question has come in about specialty size and advantages in applying. One questioner noted that surgery programs often have much smaller resident numbers compared, for example, to internal medicine, and asks if this is a disadvantage when applying.
I personally do not think it's a disadvantage at all. I'll again invite Lynn to comment on this as well, but I think we are well acquainted with some of the unique challenges that our colleagues in surgery are facing in overseeing meaningful experiences for their residents. I would strongly encourage our surgery programs to come up with innovative projects and programs that can catalyze change, positive change in your residency programs. And the size of the program absolutely is not a factor in selection. I understand why that would be a concern, but my own experience tells me that it's very often the smaller programs with the smaller numbers of residents who can often be forgotten in big health systems and big, GME footprints. So I definitely welcome proposals from programs that may be smaller in size and have a direct touch with fewer numbers of residents, because, as you heard me say, we're hoping that other programs all across the country might see what you did and be able to implement some part or perhaps all of that program in their own institution. And so over time, that can affect an entire discipline, not just your local institution. But Lynn, do you have a comment on that?
I certainly agree with you, Holly. I think in looking at the applications, it's not going to be about the numbers that are being impacted by this particular project. It's the potential impact, and especially high need areas, as you pointed out, Holly. Even if a project is done with a relatively small residency or even a fellowship, which is even smaller, but then that information is shared broadly, as has happened with the first two cycles, its impact could be magnified greatly. So I agree. I think it's not just the size of the group that will be impacted during the project. It's how much impact it might have on the clinical learning environment writ large.
Thank you. We have several questions about whether or not this is a limited opportunity. In other words, can multiple applications be considered from the same institution with different PIs, different projects, different
Yes.
programs, or potentially within the same program?
Yes. This is not a limited opportunity program. And so if there are multiple great ideas from your psychiatry residency, send them all. If there are multiple great ideas from multiple programs within your overall health system or overall institution, you are encouraged to send them all.
One of our questioners is thinking about interprofessional teams as a focus for their project. Would co-creation by learners who are not residents, but other learners in the team be sufficient?
Let me try to be very clear about this. We are looking for evidence that residents in graduate medical education will be directly impacted by the project. However, you heard me say that one of our main funding priority areas is the collaboration of high-performing interprofessional teams. And that invites applications that include projects that are based in a highly interprofessional team where residents and other interprofessionals, whether that's nursing students or nursing faculty, physical therapists, chaplains, I mean, you name it, you can engage members of your interprofessional team in whatever way you wish. I would absolutely welcome um, projects that focus on interprofessional teams and collaborative practice, but we must see direct evidence that residents are actively engaged in that project.
Thank you. Are these grants limited to implementation at a single institution? Or is this open to a program that would use grant funds to expand to other institutions with GME programs?
Both are possible. So you can definitely apply as a single program in a single institution, but you are welcome to apply in a multi-institution format or a multi-program format, either within your institution or with other institutions. So both types of applications are welcome.
Please clarify the expectations of the principal investigators. Is the focus on junior faculty, senior faculty? Can a resident be one of the PIs?
Yes, a resident can be one of the PIs, and we leave it to your good judgment. Who's the most appropriate PI? We do not have an expectation related to the most senior person at your institution, nor the most junior. We see applications that have been successful on both ends of the spectrum, applications that have had very senior PIs, but applications that have had literally very junior in their first few years on the faculty. So we leave that up to your good judgment, and we do not have an expectation related to that. And yes, residents could be a PI.
Can you provide a few examples of the kinds of measurable impact you would want to see out of one of these grants?
Well, I can tell you that several of the grants that have been funded in the first two cycles are using pre and post surveys to look at changes in either resident attitudes, obviously a difficult thing to measure, but changes in resident perception or attitudes, changes in resident skill level. I think the bigger challenge, which we'd love to see, but can be harder to quantitate right now, are changes in patient care and changes in patient outcome. There may be ways in your local institution to look at change in experiences of those who work on a particular unit in your hospital or in a particular program in your institution's GME or interprofessional programming area. So those are very important questions, and I would encourage you to identify someone with skills in assessment or evaluation to help you with that question. That's often the hardest kind of question that clinicians face when they're trying to design this kind of a project. Very often your medical school or an affiliated medical school will have that kind of expertise within the school because there is so much emphasis placed on assessment during the medical education process. Or sometimes this is exactly the kind of expertise that you will need to hire as a consultant or as someone who can help you in the design of your project. Is how are you going to make those assessments, and are there some measurements that are easy to identify and manage? Um, so that's what I'd say. Lynn, do you have anything you'd want to say?
Yeah, just a little bit. I think you outlined, Holly, what all of us who have done graduate medical education research aspire to is can we look at changes in outcomes of patient care actually in the future, since these are our trainees, and it's very hard to do that. But even looking at changes of behavior among the residents or your target audience, we have a much smaller grant project that's been through several cycles that was designed by the residents who are on all of our review committees, called Back to the Bedside. They went through an exercise to say what gives them the most meaning in their work as a resident, and it was time with patients. So all of these projects are designed to get residents allowing them to spend more time with their patients, which is a very simple thing, but a very positive thing in terms of an outcome. So looking at, Holly mentioned changes certainly in attitudes of residents, but are you allowing their behavior to change as a result of supporting them with whatever you're able to do in that in your project?
We have several questions from people who are wondering if they have received support in the past, either through grants or as a Macy faculty scholar, if they are eligible for this award.
You are absolutely eligible for this award. So any prior Macy support or ACGME support does not prohibit you from applying or being reviewed in a completely neutral fashion. So I encourage you to apply. In general, the medical education community is smaller than the big clinical communities and big research communities, and we aim to support all of you and not penalize you for having prior support.
Will there be mentorship provided to those who are selected as part of this cohort?
Well, that's a very important question, and one that I think a lot about, and it's honestly the main driver behind our convening at the midpoint of the grant cycle. Now, technically, I wouldn't go so far as to call that mentorship, but the idea behind that convening at the midpoint of the grant cycle is to offer you some advice and support, not just from, the Macy Foundation and the ACGME, but very importantly, the peer and near peer mentoring from your colleagues who will be the other grantees. And sometimes, depending upon the content of the projects that are ultimately funded, we bring in other experts who can help. And I can tell you a common topic area where we are often looking to bring in some expert help is with assessment and evaluation. But it's very, very important that you have your assessment strategy set up at the beginning of this award and not wait until the midpoint. But it's not uncommon to encounter some unexpected challenges along the way, often with assessment or with other areas of implementation. So that's a long way of answering the question about mentorship. It's not formal mentorship, but it's our way of trying to send a very clear message that we're not expecting you to be perfect in how this grant is implemented or whether it succeeds or not. We're here to support you along the way, and that's exactly why we are having the convening at the midpoint of the grant cycle.
Can two different programs from one institution, collaborate on a program that affects both?
absolutely yes. I love the idea behind that. When two programs at a single institution can see some common ground to affect residents positively in both of their programs, I would say that would be a very welcome kind of proposal.
Some of the ways that prior awardees have utilized their grant funding support? What are the kinds of budgetary expenditures that they have generally used?
Well, I'd say the most common pieces that occupy the largest percent of budgets are personnel. And personnel largely includes faculty and staff and expert consultants. And in any given grant, the relative percentage attributed to those categories can vary considerably, but the personnel costs are by and large the single biggest line item in a budget. And then how that's divided between faculty, staff, expert consultants can vary. This question does remind me to perhaps share that sometimes we'll see a grant proposal where the biggest line item is to build something, like build a building or a laboratory or a simulation center. And that is not something that we fund. So that's just a caution that we're not here to put a roof on a building. We did see a proposal for a roof on a building or to build a building. That's not what we're expecting the $100,000 award to be used for.
Holly, to that, I would like to add that in prior projects, when residents were asked to take on larger roles or to participate in a program, they often received stipends and compensation as well.
Yes, thank you.
Can
And
you
sometimes, there were incentives for residents to participate in certain aspects of the program to get the program launched or conceptualized.
Thank you. Can you speak to more about avoiding the classroom in proposals? For interprofessional teams, there are often needs to come together to learn collectively, which may occur more in a group meeting space and not immediately in the clinical space. Would this still be aligned with the concept of emphasizing the clinical learning environment?
In general, no. So while I completely understand that a classroom experience is extremely important, especially in, laying the ground rules and finding common footing. And if that were going to be, a 2-hour introductory workshop, that would be fine. But that should not be the site of the $100,000 award, meaning that these awards are really meant to take place in that clinical environment, which is where the majority of residency training is taking place and where the majority of day-to-day issues come up that are extremely complex and challenging. So I am not saying that the classroom isn't important, because it surely is, but for this particular award, we're really looking to have the vast majority of the award supporting a clinical experience. If there's a classroom part in there, that's certainly fine, but it should not represent the majority of the award.
Holly and Lynn, this is a difficult question, but it has come up several times, so I'm going to ask it. How will you consider efforts in states in which there are laws against efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, first of all, I would absolutely welcome you to apply for this award. And I want to say that I personally recognize that I have a lot to learn from you on how you are doing your work if your program is in one of those states. So number one, I welcome the award with great enthusiasm. Number two, I want to learn from your experience. Number three, I want you to follow the law. So you know the law of your state in much more detail than I will know it. So I absolutely want you to follow the law, and that's where you will teach us how do we do this very, very important, critically important work when there are barriers that for some of us are much bigger and much harder to manage than for others. And I would say if you are running a residency program in a state that has laws that make it much more difficult to have authentic programming in diversity, equity, and belonging, I consider that a pretty big challenge, but not one that we're backing away from, one that we are embracing as a broad area to lean into, to try to learn better, to ultimately provide the very best, most equitable care for all of our patients, and to properly take care of all of those who are training, learning, and providing care to patients wherever they may be in communities, hospitals, clinics, all across America. Lynn, do you have something you want to say about
Yeah,
that?
no, I support everything you've said, Holly. Just to let, I think most people on this call are deeply involved in graduate medical education, but already know we at the ACGME, because of our requirements related to diversity, have put out quite a bit of guidance for all programs around limitations that they may experience. We started with the Supreme Court decision that really focused again on higher education, not GME. But we also have a lot of resources in our Equity Matters section, again, free to everybody at our website. We have opportunities within Equity Matters to participate in projects also. So lots of tools, lots of things that you can use both in your regular graduate medical education activities, and that might stimulate some thoughts for proposals. I think we all know that a commitment to diversity in healthcare results in better patient outcomes and results in better training for residents and fellows and all health professionals. So we all remain committed to that, and hope we can support those of you who are struggling with these limitations to be able to do what you can to promote activities that will promote improved education and equitable health care.
Does the resident on the application need to continue to be a resident through the end of the award period? i.e., if the senior resident is on the application, can a different resident take over when they graduate? How do you navigate this if a senior resident is the co-creator? Would that preclude eligibility?
That does not preclude eligibility. In fact, in our first cycle, we had chief residents who, by the time the grant period ended, were no longer chief residents and were in their first job. So you may absolutely apply as a PI, but there should be evidence of the handoff either to another resident, or the other PI is going to be filling in. Just make that a part of your written application. It is definitely not going to preclude you from applying as a co-PI.
Does it have to be a resident program that applies for the grant? Can it be from a dean's unit office, like the Office for Research, the Office for Diversity, etc.?
Yeah, it can definitely be from a dean's level office, but if an application comes from a dean's level office, we're going to be looking very carefully for evidence of buy-in from the residents and the program director and the department chair, that they want this program, that they're supporting of the program, that they're grateful that you're interested in helping to develop this program for their benefit. So yes, it can absolutely come from you, but we will look to make sure that the environment where you are aiming to implement that project is strongly supportive of that project.
We are reaching the top of the hour, so this will be our last question. It is related to a community-based program. They are exploring a partnership with community organizations for activities to support relationship and trust building between residents and local community as part of residency. If the efforts take place in the city rather than in the clinic, would this be a fit for the Catalyst Awards?
Yes, absolutely. So if your institution, and when I say institution, I mean your department, your program, perhaps your health system, I'm not sure who's organizing your community-based experiences or city-based experiences, but we would absolutely welcome that kind of support because we know that the vast majority of health and healthcare take place in the community. That does not necessarily align completely with where our residency trainees spend most of their time, but we welcome the opportunity to have the residents learning in the community. And if you have a project that lends itself to that, we would certainly welcome it. Lynn, do you have anything you would add to that?
No, I totally agree. I think especially in the subject areas that Macy prioritizes, there's a lot of you can see a lot of opportunity for community involvement. So I don't think it needs to stay in the clinic or in the hospital, but certainly many excellent projects will come out of there too.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. We're going to go to a discussion about how to apply. We are utilizing an online application for this program. To access the online application, you must first go to our website, click on Grants in the navigation bar, and go to the Catalyst Award page. For your convenience, the URL is displayed on this slide and in the chat. From there, click the Start Your Application button to be directed to our online application platform. To apply, you will need to register for an account on the online application platform. You will also need to get the tax ID for your school as part of the registration process. Once you have registered and logged in, you may save and return to your application as often as you like prior to submitting it. If you have any questions during the application process, you may email us at info@macyfoundation.org. But before you email us, we encourage you to review the website at the URL on the slide. We will continue to update the web page throughout the open application period. Finally, as a reminder, by next week, a recording of this session, both the audio portion and slides, will be available on our website.
We hope that you will keep in touch with the Macy Foundation for more information about our many grants, programs, initiatives, podcasts, webinars, and blogs, and of course, the 2025 Catalyst Awards for Transformation in Graduate Medical Education Grants Program. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope to receive applications from many of you this September. Have a wonderful summer.